Good evening, everybody. This is Mr. Eschbacher coming to you live from the underground AP compound, and this is the first of hopefully won't be too many quarantine classes. So today we're going to talk about the New Deal, and I've got a wonderfully articulate and super neato list of words up there. I will eventually put those up on the classroom as well. You have a PowerPoint from me. You got a lot of our cool stuff. Please don't forget to write questions down and send them to me. I put a parking lot up on the classroom, and I'm going to ask you, please, pretty please, give me at least two things on that parking lot so I can come back to you later on and help you figure this stuff out. So we're talking about the other Roosevelt. Teddy's looking on. He's somewhat impressed. And of course, since we are talking about Franklin Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, also called FDR, we have to have our lovely fireplace going, and if you did any reading at all, you know why. So let's go to the big board first. If we're going to talk about FDR, we need to talk about some vocabulary. First of all, fireside chats. You should know those. That's the radio speeches FDR gave to the American people. It's funny, as we were trying to set this up, my wife talked to me about an interview she did of her grandmother for like a 7th grade project or something. How she remembered FDR's fireside chats. He spoke in a plain and simple kind of tone. He explained what he was trying to do. He was trying to reassure people about what the New Deal was all about. 100 days. These days, the president's first 100 days in office, I don't care if he's a Democrat, Republican, 100 days becomes the benchmark. What have you done for me? Because when Franklin Roosevelt was elected, he came in on a wide of Democratic Party domination, and if you've got one party running the show, it's pretty easy to rubber stamp those programs, and they were able to get more legislation passed in 100 days than it normally takes Congress 2.5 years to do. Fifth cousin, we're putting that up as a vocab word because FDR married Eleanor Roosevelt, whose maiden name was Roosevelt. Yes, FDR and Eleanor were fifth cousins. In fact, at their wedding, Teddy gave the bride away, and when he did, he said to Frankie boy, "It's nice to keep the name in the family." James, if you want to say hi anytime you want. Say hi, James.
Hi.
Okay, my cameraman John Eschbacher is grabbing supplies here. So we're going to get this operation a little bit more smooth. For those of you freaked out by the fifth cousin thing, here's all I have to say to you. Do you know your fifth cousin? And are you sure you haven't asked her out to the prom yet? Okay. For the New Deal, we've got to talk about the 3 R's. Remember, it's one of our brainwashings. If I say New Deal, you say relief, recovery, reform. New Deal. Hi, Ruby. All right. New Deal programs are important in that they provide direct relief to the American people. FDR realized people were suffering so much that you had to take extraordinary measures, that a deficit, the government going into debt was okay, that it was more important to give people jobs, give people hope, or make sure they didn't lose their homes. Recovery, we talked about the story of my broken finger, that many New Deal programs like the NRA/NIRA were designed to give direct rules in place to try to correct some of the problems and to fix our business structure. Reform, to try to stop some of the problems that caused the Great Depression from happening again. The SEC, the FDIC, to try to correct some of the issues that we have with the stock market today and banks today. So if we look at our incredibly artistic big board here, we can look at some of these programs. The FERA, the Federal Emergency Relief Act. FDR said, states, listen, I'm going to give you hundreds of millions of dollars in direct aid, but if you create jobs with it, I'll give you even more. So I'm going to help you end suffering, help make sure people have food, and we're going to get directly involved. Another important New Deal program, the bank holiday. I would classify this as relief because it's more like, psychological relief. So FDR's first fireside chat, March 6, 1933. He goes up to the American people and he says, look, I know you're scared, but I need you to put your money back in the banks. I need you to trust me with this. So we're going to close all the banks. Government inspectors are going to come around. They're going to make sure that they check over the books. And if your bank reopens, that means it's safe. If the bank is not good to go, it's not safe, we will not let it open until problems have been corrected. Remember the FDR line from his inauguration. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. All right, we've got the CCC, another great example of relief. My kids, they're teenage boys. They eat too darn much. They cost me a lot of money. And in the Great Depression, your family's broke. You need help. So what basically happens is, James, come here, help me demonstrate the CCC. So 18 to 25-year-old young men, imagine they are basically told, repeat after me, this is my shovel.
This is my shovel.
There are many like it, but this one is mine.
This one's mine.
Yeah, that's right. So what happens is they basically put you in military-style camps, and they say, look, you're going to do conservation projects. You're going to dig irrigation ditches. You're going to drain swamps so we don't have skeeters and malaria. Green Lake State Park, that was a CCC program. We're going to plant trees to prevent soil erosion. And you're going to live in these camps. We'll give you 3 hots and a cot. We'll feed you, give you a place to live. You're not going to be a burden on your parents. And you can send the money back home to mom and dad. And who's not, who's kidding who? Young men ages 18 to 25, they tend to get in a lot of trouble. And if you've got unemployment among that group of people, you've got a problem. All right, moving along. Going into recovery world. Now, this is where it gets a little bit funky. Remember, the New Deal is called the alphabet soup. It's easy to get confused, especially on the AP test. So what I say is, for some of them, you just lump them together. Don't overthink this. All right, the NIRA and the NRA. Now, NRA, that's not the folks with the guns. That's a Second Amendment question for later on. But what the NIRA and the NRA do is they create codes for businesses. They crack down on cutthroat business tactics that might make small businesses go down. They enforce maximum working hours. They get rid of child labor. I got a great funny story for you when we get to World War II about the effects of the New Deal banning child labor. They protect workers' rights. The PWA and the WPA, use them together, that way you don't get confused. The big idea is, there's a movie from the 90s called Field of Dreams. The guy goes out in a cornfield and he hears this ghost whisper, if you build it, he will come. So think of it this way, if you build stuff, people get jobs. What they do is they create massive construction projects. The Public Works Administration and then the Works Progress Authority. Big public works programs. We're going to build schools. We're going to build hospitals. We're going to dredge out canals. We'll build bridges. We'll build stuff because construction creates jobs. I mentioned in class the other day, ESE used to be called Kinney Street Elementary. They knocked that building down, they replaced it with ESE, but the original building was from the New Deal. It was a part of that whole idea of public works projects. Right, James?
Yeah.
Okay. Moving along, I got a couple reformers here. Reformers that are still with us today. And that's a big thing when we talk about the New Deal, the lasting legacy. There are still effects we feel from the New Deal, and there are still New Deal programs with us. The FDIC. Banks failed during the Great Depression, and if your bank collapsed, you were out of luck. You got a piece of paper that says you have this much money. Well, we could use that as toilet paper today. But that's a story for another day. So what the FDIC does is it creates insurance for your bank deposits. It makes sure that if the bank goes out of business, burns down, gets robbed, the government has to cut you a check. The SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, they are the cops of Wall Street. They're going to crack down on stock fraud, on insider trading. Ironically, the first leader of the SEC was Joe Kennedy, JFK's daddy, who partially made his fortune kind of sort of insider trading. And then there was a time that FDR made him take his pants off in the White House, but that's also for World War II. You have to wait for that one. The Tennessee Valley Authority is a good example of recovery. It's also a good example of how New Deal programs could be constitutional. Oh, controversial. Sorry, we'll get to constitutional in a minute. The TVA, Tennessee Valley, massive problems with flooding in the springtime. Also, it was a region where most people didn't even have electricity. So what the Tennessee Valley Authority did was it created government-run hydro dams, hydroelectric power to control that flooding, but also make electricity. And if I could do a Bernie Sanders, the big controversy with it was socialism. Okay? And that becomes a big knock on the New Deal. Critics don't like it because many aspects of it are socialism. Okay. Moving along. Social Security, a great example of reform. During the Depression, your bank closed. The stock market went, poor grandma, grandpa, they got nothing. What's grandma gonna do? Work for a moving company? What's Grandpa gonna do? Plow 40 acres? You know, he's got that sciatica in his back. His back is hurting. Wait, I can't make fun of old people's backs. That's bad, because that's me. So anyway, Social Security, it was actually the idea of this California physician, a guy named Dr. Townsend, who said to himself, "Stuff! What if we just made a 2% tax on people's income? We could guarantee people in their golden age years of life a $200 a month pension, which would be like, you're living set, you're good to go." And that's what Social Security was. FDR created this, and again, some people didn't like it because you're creating a tax, now the government's getting involved in pensions. Social Security is still with us today, but it is one of the big issues that connects the New Deal to today in period 9. Why? Because after World War II, those soldiers came home and they really missed their wives and girlfriends, and 9 months later, we started what's called the baby boom. And today, we have people who were born between 1945 and 1965, the baby boomers. We have a tsunami of old farts, and they are at or close to retirement age, and Social Security is being strained because of it. Plus, remember, back in the 1930s, the average life expectancy was less. And you know what? Thankfully, people are living longer, but that also means you have more old people who are living longer and longer and longer. And that's probably why you and I will be working till we're, I don't know, 80 or 90. Moving along here. Some other terms for the New Deal. John, we getting this? I got cameraman John in the 10th grade here. The Brain Trust. FDR's Brain Trust. He did a crazy thing. He got smart people. Remember, back then FDR was the last president to take office in March. So from election day in November until he took office on March 4th, he's sitting there in the state of New York. He gets a bunch of people. They brainstorm tons of New Deal programs so that when he takes office, they're backing up a truck. Beep, 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 beep. And Congress is rubber stamping these ideas. Guys like Harry Hopkins, Raymond Moley, not in the Brain Trust, but another person I'd like you to know, Frances Perkins. She's kind of a big deal. We've mentioned her before. She, as a young woman, worked in the settlement houses of New York City. She saw what it was like to be poor. She saw what working class and poor families went through. FDR made her the first woman ever to be in the cabinet as Secretary of Labor. And she brought a unique perspective that her life experiences as a settlement house worker. By the way, another famous settlement house worker connected to the Roosevelt administration, some lady named Eleanor. All right. Big picture stuff. When we talk about the New Deal, we have to have a proper British accent because we talk about Keynesian economics. John Maynard Keynes was the economist who said, look, governments are the only thing that are big enough, bad enough, powerful enough to elevate your GDP, your gross domestic product. So what happens? According to Keynes, governments have to engage in what we call pump priming, sometimes called deficit spending. Let's face facts, guys. What's the government really good at? Spending our money. And the government is so big, they can spend so much money, like giving a job to someone. And when you have a job, you have money. And when you have that money, what are you going to do? You're probably going to go out and buy an Xbox game or 25 gallons of ice cream, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what happens when you go out and you do that? Now that store that you've spent money on, they're going to restock their shelves. They're going to order more products. The factory that they order from now says, dude, we got to hire more workers. Those workers now have jobs. They have money. What are they going to do? They're going to spend it. So it's inject, prime the pump, money right there from the government into the hands of the workers by giving them jobs. You know, whether it's an 18 to 25-year-old man young man raking leaves for the CCC, or a construction worker working for the WPA, or actors, actresses, musicians, artists doing WPA projects. We're going to give you a job so you spend money and we get that economy's engine rolling again. The downside is, though, it is deficit spending. And this is something that was really a difficult and controversial thing. You know, today our deficit is something like $22 frickin' trillion. Well, back then the idea of the government intentionally running a deficit was controversial. Fun fact, FDR did try to balance the budget in 1938, and what that did was it led to a recession and the economy kind of went because of that. All right, let's talk about some controversy and some opposition. FDR, he's a tightrope walker. He's having a difficult time. He's got people on the right. Now remember, when we talk about politics and we say the right, that means conservatives. People are like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Okay, if you had Mr. Stop, you remember that. All right, the idea, whoa, whoa, whoa. That's too much government involvement. There was an organization called the Liberty League. Their symbol was the Liberty Bell. I tried to draw that. It looked really bad. Okay? Other opponents who were conservative thought FDR was doing too much. William Randolph Hearst. Remember him? Famous yellow journalist, newspaper publisher. One of the leading members of the Liberty League was former President Herbert Hoover. You know, maybe he didn't get the hint, but he was a big critic of it. At the same time, FDR is going to have other critics. People on the left who say, hey, buddy, you're not going far enough. Okay? People who say the government should do more. People who, quite frankly, come up with some crazy ideas, who kind of make some false promises. Sometimes you will hear the word demagogue. Someone who promises, hey, I've got the simple solution. It's really simple, and everybody knows it. I'll give you an example. You're going to hurt yourself. All right. This is my man, Huey Long. Huey Long was often called the Kingfish. There is a great movie out there starring John Goodman from a while back you can watch called All the King's Men. Huey Long was the governor and was a senator from Louisiana, and he had a program in 1936. He was going to run for president. He was going to challenge FDR. He was a Democrat. He probably was the single biggest threat to FDR. It wasn't a Republican in those 4 terms FDR served. It was the Kingfish, Huey Long. Because Long had a platform called Share Our Wealth. Watch out whenever people say they have a simple solution. Oh, it's a simple solution. I am going to confiscate the excess wealth. If you make so much money on top of that, I'm just taking it. The government's going to take it and we will distribute it to the American people. Huey Long promised all we have to do is take money from the wealthy and I can guarantee a $5,000 a year income. Everyone, minimum $5,000 a year, which was a decent living back then. Not rich, but a decent living. And, he promised a chicken in every pot, a car in every home, and, quote, every man a king. Now, Huey Long was so crooked he had to screw his pants on. But, as a crooked politician, we got to give him love because Louisiana was one of the states that got out of the Great Depression first. He actually was a kind crook, and he did a lot of great stuff. Long never got to run against FDR. He was in the Louisiana State Capitol building, and they still have the holes in the wall. Huey Long had forced the removal of a corrupt judge in Louisiana, and it led to him being shot. And they actually have a plaque in the hallway where the bullet holes still are, and the Kingfish was no more. Other critics of FDR, excuse me there, Mr. Peanut, was Father Charles Coughlin. Coughlin was a Canadian priest. What's that about, eh? He didn't preach about hockey, you hoser, no. What he did do, though, he started off as a supporter of FDR. And he had a radio show. He had national audience. He had a lot of influence. And then something really weird happened with Father Charles Coughlin, because he went dark side. Coughlin, again, watch out anytime people try to say, oh, I've got the answer, it's simple. Coughlin tried to blame the Great Depression on an international conspiracy of bankers and Jews. And according to Coughlin, all you had to do was print silver. That will fix everything. The old populist party idea. But Coughlin played it up as, everybody who has power knows this. You can fix everyone's problems. His rants on the radio became really critical, downright attacking of FDR. He became more and more anti-Semitic. When we talk about World War II, he's going to be a supporter not just of American isolationism, but he becomes like a cheerleader for Hitler and the Nazis. Yikes! FDR tried to do everything he could to silence him, but he couldn't because we have that First Amendment. Eventually, the Catholic Church stepped in, yanked Father Coughlin off the radio. But again, a good example of Someone attacking, making simple promises. Other people. Upton Sinclair. A weem away, a weem away, a weem away. You remember the jungle? He's a muckraker. And by the way, if I say muckrakers, you say? Yes, that's right, digging up the dirt. Upton Sinclair is no longer muckraking. He decides in the 1930s he wants to be a crook. I mean a politician. He runs for the governor of California, and he has his own program called EPIC. End Poverty in California. He thought FDR was going to support him. But remember, Sinclair is a hardcore socialist. FDR just likes to kind of dip his toes in it. Sinclair said, I want to confiscate lands that are not being used. I want to confiscate factories that are not being used. Have the state of California take control of those lands, and that we will create jobs. FDR never backed Sinclair. He was unsuccessful when he ran for the governor of California. The biggest issue, though, comes from the Supreme Court. In 1936, FDR wins in a landslide. And I mean a landslide. And he gets cocky. We've all been there, right? You know that moment we kind of get a little too full of ourselves, and FDR says to himself, I can roll this joint. The American people have given me a mandate. I can do what I want. He launches what's called the Second New Deal. Right about 1935, right before the election, and then 1936, the year of the election. And that's going to focus more on reform. That's where we're going to see stuff like Social Security in there. And FDR gets frustrated. We have in America this funky system called, wait for it, checks and balances. We have three branches of government. The Democrats control Congress. They control the White House. Those two branches are working together. But the Supreme Court's a little different. There are 6 older, above the age of 70 justices appointed by conservative Republican presidents. There are 3 liberal to moderate Democrat judges. And 2 really big New Deal programs that get declared unconstitutional. In 1935, we have Schechter Poultry versus the U.S. Kids, this one's on the Regents. You got to know it. If you can't remember Schechter Poultry or the spelling scares you, it is totally historically okay to remember its nickname. It is called the sick chicken case. You see, the Schechter brothers, they was a Brooklyn, New York poultry company. You know, they was, making the chickens sleep with the fishes so you could put them on your plate. Well, it turns out the Schechter brothers were selling diseased poultry. Hang on. Just like class, I got a drink. They got in trouble for selling sick chickens. Then they really got in trouble because they were breaking laws and codes established by the NRA. Ironically, the symbol for the NRA was a blue eagle. Now, the way it worked, the NRA was you had to abide by no child labor, no cutthroat tactics, cap on hours, other codes. If you were found in compliance, you got to hold a sign up, put it up in your shop that said, NRA, we do our part. And you got this blue eagle. And people were told, go to the businesses with the blue eagle because they're helping with the depression. Well, the Schechter brothers, they're not going to go down without a fight. Yo, they're from Brooklyn. You got a problem with that? Hey, forget about it. So what ends up happening is, we go to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court votes 6-3. Not so fast, my friend. FDR, your NRA is unconstitutional. For one thing, the Schechter brothers operate exclusively in Brooklyn, in New York. They're not crossing state lines. Hey, you, no cell phones in class. You know that. Okay, so what ends up happening is they get in trouble for that with the NRA. FDR, you can't have Congress make laws that regulate trade inside of a state. But the other thing was, the Supreme Court really jumps on, whoa. Technically speaking, only Congress can regulate interstate trade. And the way the NRA was written, it was essentially Congress going, hey, here you go, Mr. President, take our power, it's all yours. So now FDR loses. One way you can think of this is, sick chickens, they shoot down the Blue Eagle. The next year, you get a Supreme Court case called Butler versus the U.S. 1936. The AAA, one of FDR's most beloved New Deal programs, which surprisingly I forgot to put up here, but I'll spell it for you. AAA. The Agricultural Adjustment Act. Here's what it did. It said, Old MacDonald has a farm, E-I-E-I, uh-oh, because he got overproduction. We will pay you not to grow stuff. We will pay you not to raise livestock, up to 25%. So if you've got 100 acres of land, plow over, destroy 25. If you've got 100 little piggies, well, some of them ain't going to market. It was controversial because of the Depression. People are hungry. The Supreme Court in Butler versus the U.S. ruled it unconstitutional. Now later on, the AAA will get replaced by a new program called food stamps, where the government said, fine, we'll buy that food from you and just distribute it to people who are in need. But FDR freaks out. He gets worried. Well, you shot down two of my most important New Deal programs. What's next? And oh, by the way, did you see the butt-kicking election I had? The American people, they got my back. And FDR comes up with a plan. It's technically called the Judicial Reorganization Act. The Judicial Reorganization Act. Today we call it court packing. FDR says to himself, stuff! What I want to do is, I'm going to add 6 more judges. What a great football play if I could draw that up. We're playing that piece of junk red team. What if I could add 6 more guys on the field? Remember, the president cannot fire federal judges, but he gets to hire them. So what he wants to do is say, well, look, there's 6 old guys who are conservative, and he goes on the radio, gives one of those fireside chats, and he says, look, what I want to do is give these old farts help. So for every old judge, all 6 of them, I want to add their replacement. That way, they're working already, and when the other guy retires, his replacement's there. And oh, what a coinky-dink. That means there'll be 9 guys who support me and 6 who oppose me. But we have this funny thing in America called checks and balances. And in Congress, which had always been, yes sir, Mr. President, sir, all of a sudden goes, whoa! Guys, remember, do contextualization. This court packing plan gets proposed in 1938. What's going on in 1938? You have totalitarian dictators like Joseph Stalin. You have fascism in Italy and Germany. You've got guys like Mussolini and Adolf Hitler. And the American people and the American Congress kind of go, whoa, Frankie boy, we got to talk. And Congress rejects FDR's court packing plan. And what this does is it starts a series of events. The failed court packing plan, combined with the recession that happens in 1938 when FDR tries to balance the budget, bring about the end of the New Deal. Now, why do we care about the New Deal? Because we have programs today that are still with us. The FDIC, the SEC, and Social Security. More importantly, we have a change in the focus and the attitude about the government. FDR gets inspiration from his cooler relative. The idea that the government is responsible for getting involved in the welfare of not just the economy but the American people. If you have to do synthesis, you connect Teddy and FDR, or you go forward. In the 1960s, Lyndon B. Johnson, LBJ, is going to unleash what we will call the Great Society. The idea of the government being involved, as some critics say, from cradle to grave. Fast forward into period 9. You read about this NAMSCO recently with the Great Recession and President Obama's efforts. Look at the opposition too. The modern version of Liberty League came out in the early 2010 or so. It was called the Tea Party Movement. I've got some great links on the class where I want you to check them out. The idea of deficit spending. The government doesn't blink an eye now to go into debt. And again, our debt is something like $22 frickin' trillion. Something else though. Yes, the New Deal doesn't end the Great Depression, but a lot of those New Deal programs help lay the infrastructure, help establish our ability to produce, that's going to lead to our ability to come in and, America moment, produce, and save the world during World War II. The last big thing is we'll talk about the New Deal coalition. The New Deal helps to reshape who the members of the Democratic Party are because it reaches out to so many different groups. You have the city political machine dudes. You have factory workers in urban areas. You have white Southern Democrats. You have farmers. You have this very diverse network. The New Deal is going to do some great things for African Americans. I'll give you one quick example. There's a woman, you can Google her, Frances Marion. I was going to play a song for you. Maybe I'll put it on the classroom. She's an African American opera singer. She was supposed to put a concert on in the hall owned by the Daughters of the American Revolution, this very snobby, exclusive club. But they said, no, you're African American. We're not going to let you do that. Well, the most famous member of that club was Eleanor Roosevelt. She resigned. She quit. She left the organization. And she said, honey, you come with me. You don't need their concert hall. You're going to have a special concert at the Lincoln Memorial. And Eleanor doesn't get enough credit. She hounded FDR. She was relentless that you got to do more for women, for children, for African Americans. And we said previously that the tilt where we start to see African Americans coming into the Democratic Party begins here. The big accelerated part won't come until the 1960s with that guy named LBJ. So, we processed a lot. I need your questions. I've got a parking lot out there. Guys, terms, specific questions. There is no such thing as a dumb question. I'm going to do this for you. Give me a suggestion. If you like stuff, if you don't, I'll get some more sophisticated graphics. I'll come up with some stuff. I'm here for you. And, well, it's time for Teddy and I to sign off. So, plug in your Chromies, homies, and I'll see you next time.